Hey guys, it's Kevin review for the Boss Baby Family Business. So what the Boss Baby Family Business is essentially about is basically we do still continue to center on the Templeton brothers. However, they have now grown up a ton. They are adults now, and they're both in very different places in their life. While Tim has grown up to be a very successful, he's been very successful in his life. You know, he's a father, he's got 2 kids. You can see that he is kind of struggling with his own family issues. Meanwhile, Ted has basically become this huge, he's become this big, entrepreneur. He's very rich in that way and things like that. He's a very successful CEO, and the two of them are still very much clashing. They are not seeing eye to eye. There's a lot of unresolved feelings that both of them very much do harbor overall, and so basically, one day, when the two of them are reunited, we discover that there actually is a new boss baby that is Tim's son that basically enlists their help to stop a professor from to basically enlist their help to go on a new mission to stop this professor that's going to be erasing childhoods worldwide, but also kind of gives them a chance to maybe reconcile some of the feelings that they have. The Boss Baby Family Business overall, I was not very excited for this movie. I didn't really understand why we needed this sequel. The first film I felt like wasn't really that well received, so I didn't really think that this one was all that necessary. Now, I will say, I had not previously seen the first film, so I did finally watch it before this one. I don't hate it as much as others do, but it's not a very good movie either. I think that it's a very, one-joke premise. Oh my god, the baby talks. Oh my god, he's so much more adult than everyone else, but he's also kind of an asshole in that way. There's a lot of jokes that just get very tiring. I do think there's a little bit of cleverness to the plot. I think there's a little bit of heart there, but overall, I just find it to be kind of a bore as a film, and while I was originally going to review it, I just didn't really end up having a lot to say. So going into this one, I didn't really have that much anticipation for it. I honestly thought that it looked way worse than the first one, especially just the premise itself is just so weird and out there, and I just didn't really know how it was going to work overall, and especially the announcement that it was getting released simultaneously on Peacock. That did not get me excited either. It made me feel like, oh my god, this movie really is doomed to fail, but I did check it out, did not see it in theaters. I watched it on Peacock with my friends because that's what I ultimately decided to do. I watched it, and honestly, this film is not that bad. I actually do think that there are quite a few elements of this film that are better than the first one. Don't get me wrong, this is not a groundbreaking animated movie. It's not even really that great of a film, but compared to the first one, I do think this one has a little bit more going for it and actually is an improvement over the first film in quite a few areas, but it's still really not that great of a film overall. But we are just getting to right now, starting off with the voice cast. Look, I will say this. As much as I didn't like the first film, the voice cast was actually one of the better parts of that movie. I think everyone did a really good job, and for the most part, I really do like everyone here. Alec Baldwin continues to be really fun as this character. You know, despite my feelings on the character of the Boss Baby or Ted Templeton in this film, I do still feel like Baldwin is very much into the role. He is a lot of fun to watch here, and I think he overall does do a really good job. You can see, how much he's aged as a character, and I think he does a good job with that, but James Marsden, I gotta say, was really the big standout in this movie for me. I really liked him as the character of Tim. You can see that he still has retained some of that childlike innocence that he had as a kid, but he also is struggling a lot as a parent, and you really do see that. It's honestly kind of a heartfelt performance, what he ends up doing. He's fun in the role, obviously, but what I really appreciate is that they do give him a lot more to do in this movie than I think even Miles Bakshi had in the first film, and I think as a whole, James Marsden really, for me, sticks out as the standout in this movie. I really liked what he ended up doing. I thought he actually added some layers to this character that wasn't really there in the first movie, and I really liked how he ended up portraying this character. It sucks that Tobey Maguire had to go because I really did like what he did in that first movie, but I think Marsden is a worthy replacement, and I think he does do a really good job here. Unfortunately, though, the one performance that I just could never really get behind in this movie is Amy Sedaris, who plays the Boss Baby, or Tina Templeton. Look, I like Sedaris a lot as an actress. You guys know how much I loved her in BoJack Horseman and things like that. But here, I just never really fully bought into this role. And I think what separates her from, say, Alec Baldwin's performance, that Alec Baldwin, like I said, is really trying to sell this character. He's really dynamic. It never really feels like he's phoning it in. Whereas with Sedaris, I just didn't really feel like she was all that into this. It really did kind of feel like she was just kind of going through the motions here overall. I never really bought into her role, and I just felt that she was kind of miscast here. I didn't really feel like this was, you know, a baby in, you know, this was like a baby with adult sensibilities. I never really felt that way. I just felt like I was watching Amy Sedaris voice a character. Like, it just didn't really do much for me. I like her a lot as an actress, but this role, I just never really felt she fully settled into, so that was the one role I had a hard time buying into. But I will say, everyone else does a really good job. Ariana Greenblatt is very good as Tim's daughter. I liked her a lot. I thought that she gave a lot of heart to the film as well. I really enjoyed what she ended up doing. Jeff Goldblum is a much stronger villain in this film. He has a lot more to work with, and he's just way more memorable as a character. He's also really funny. Like, anytime I laughed in the movie, it was usually at something that he was saying, and I really liked what he ended up doing in this film. Eva Longoria is pretty good here, and Jimmy Kimmel and Lisa Kudrow do come back. They don't have a ton to do, but I still thought that they were okay in this movie. Overall, I thought the cast was pretty good here. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because this is where we get to the stuff that I do think does help, but also hurt this movie. The directing here by Tom McGrath, I will say he did a pretty good job with directing this film. The one thing I will absolutely give him compared to the first movie is that this film is clearly trying to have a lot more heart and have a little bit more bite to it in terms of its tone, and I think he did do a good job with that. The problem is, for me, I just didn't find this film to be very funny. I didn't really feel like the comedy was working overall. I found a lot of it to just be very childish, and a lot of the jokes really did end up falling flat. So on that side of things, I can't really say his directing for me. But what worked for me more this time around, like I said, is the emotion to the story. It felt more genuine this time around, whereas the first film, it felt a little bit too forced, and I think he did a better job in the third act of that movie, but anytime he tried to, you know, really like tug at the heartstrings, it just didn't really work. Whereas here, I felt like it kind of did, and I liked what he ended up doing in terms of the directing overall. Now, the screenplay of this movie, this is where it's a bit of a mixed bag for me, because half of this movie I really do like, and the other half I'm not as big of a fan of. I'll say right now, the stuff that doesn't really work for me in this movie, unfortunately, is the main plot of this film. I just never really bought into this rivalry that Ted and Tim had. I understood why it was happening because, you know, Ted's in a place where he doesn't have any recollection of that first film because, you know, his memory was wiped and things like that, whereas Tim has these very fond memories, and so anytime he tries to interact with Ted, they're just not really on the same wavelength. I understand that, but I just felt like it was a very rushed conflict. It felt like Ted showed up, and then immediately these two were just kind of going at it, and then immediately they're going along this mission, and I just didn't really fully buy into it. I think they do a better job towards the end of this film of really selling it. There's a really nice scene between them in the third movie where they're kind of like talking things out, and I really did in the third act, and they're kind of like talking things out, and that's something I did overall appreciate because I thought they did a better job of getting us to really understand this conflict and why they are so at odds with each other. But like I said, I just never really felt it in the way that the movie wanted me to. And the mission itself is one that I just never really bought into much either. For a good majority of this movie, these two are separated, and so it didn't feel like for a while there was a lot going on in terms of plot. What I really did like, though, was actually a subplot in this movie going on with Tim. There's a big portion of this movie where, like I said, he hasn't really grown up yet. He's very much still a child in that way. He's retained a lot of that whimsical side of him that he had in that first movie. He has a lot of memories of his childhood that are very fun, but because of that, it's really causing him to clash with his older daughter because she isn't really into this anymore. There's a lot of things that he is trying to get her to, he's trying to bond with her, but they're clashing because she's just not really in that place anymore. She's growing up, she is pursuing, different things in her life, and you can see throughout the rest of the film, Tim is making a concerted effort when he eventually reverts back to a child to try to connect with her, and that part of the movie I liked quite a bit. There's a really nice sort of father-daughter story going on, especially when we get into an aspect of Tabitha as a character, with her basically having to do this show for school, but her sort of like struggling with it. I thought for me that was the best part of this movie. I really enjoyed that whole subplot. I liked Tim trying to connect with her. I thought that was the best part of the movie for me, and it's, again, maybe it's because how good Marsden and Greenblatt were, but I thought that part of the movie, that was the film at its best, and I thought they did a really good job with that in terms of the screenplay. So that's the part of the movie that really did work for me. Like I said, the stuff that didn't really work for me is the humor. I just didn't find this film to be very funny, and the mission itself that these two are going on, I just wasn't that interested in up until what they did with Jeff Goldblum's character, because at first, I didn't really like him that much, but then they started to dive into him a bit more, and I like that because I felt like the first movie, Steve Buscemi's character, barely felt like a character. He kind of just felt like he was just there all of a sudden, and now we're supposed to, feel his, like, villainous presence, and I just never really felt it. His character was literally just, like, he wanted to replace puppies with babies, and that's kind of it, whereas there's a lot more going on with Jeff Goldblum. There's a lot more stakes to him as a character, and there's a lot more that we dive into. He's a lot more complex of a character, and I thought overall that they just did a much better job with that, so that's something that I did really enjoy. There are also moments where the film will try to harken back to events of the first movie, and it just never really worked. They do this thing with where we get to meet the parents of Ted and Tim, and they're a lot older now, and I just didn't feel it was very necessary. I felt you honestly could have removed that from the movie entirely. These parents were really dumb in the first movie, and let's just say they have not really grown up that much, and I just didn't really buy into it, and similar to the first movie, I had a hard time buying into this premise at points. The idea that they've reverted back to children. There are moments in this movie where you will have, like, Tim and his wife, and she's like, oh, you kind of look like my husband as a baby, and it's like, oh, really? Maybe it's because it is your husband as a baby. So I just had a hard time suspending my disbelief, and this, again, this is not an isolated issue. Like, this is something I had an issue with in the first film. I just think that the premise is really just kind of dumb, and the film doesn't do the greatest job in terms of really selling you on it and getting you behind the premise overall. I did have a hard time with that in this movie at points. But when you do understand, like, the reasoning for why they're in this situation, I actually did think that worked quite well. I thought there was a bit more, like I said, heart to it, and that's something I did enjoy. The animation, though, here, I will say, is remarkable in this film. I honestly think it's a big improvement over the first movie. Everything looks very colorful. There's one scene, especially in terms of this dream sequence, and I was honestly stunned with how much they did. It's this very elaborate sort of scene, but it's really well constructed, and I really enjoyed the animation here. Everything feels very lifelike, but again, it's a very colorful film, and I think that's something that really did work in terms of the animation. The score by Hans Zimmer is still really good. I enjoyed his score in the first movie, and I continue to enjoy it here. And the editing, I think this film overall was well paced, but like I said, I do think that it felt quite rushed in the first act of the movie, but as we got a little bit further into the premise, I thought that the pacing was not that bad. I never found myself bored by this movie or anything. I just wanted a little bit more from it. Overall, The Boss Baby Family Business is a pretty harmless sequel. There's not a lot about this movie that overall pisses me off. I think there are some really strong, there's a lot of strong voice work. There's a little bit more heart to this movie than the first one. There's a little bit more that was going for. There's a really touching father-daughter story. The animation is still really good, but overall the film doesn't fully work for me because I just never was fully able to buy into this premise, and I never really was won over in terms of comedy. The movie did not really make me laugh in a lot of areas, but there are quite a few things it does better in terms of story, in terms of the villain, in terms of in terms of the heart. That stuff is definitely better this time around, but the things that have still, they are not fully able to the things that are still lacking for me is some of the story, is some of the characters and the humor. That stuff just never fully won me over, and so as a whole, we have a film that is pretty harmless, but I don't think is really anything all that special, but had a little bit more going for it than I did overall expect. But it doesn't really change the fact that this is an extremely unnecessary sequel that I don't really think we needed in any sense, and there isn't a lot that it does to really change my mind about that. So I am going to give The Boss Baby Family Business overall a C. But over, guys, to my review, The Boss Baby Family Business. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.